Yep, I'm an assistant professor in computer science. I do computing education research and some other things, and I'm just still learning about all these exciting and sometimes dystopic tools that we are living in the rise, potential fall of various things. So I'm very excited to chat about this today. Troy?
Yep, I'm Troy Schotter. I'm a PhD student in the University of Maine, working under Greg Nelson. Really excited about all this AI and all the students' effects, or the students' behavior around it and how they treat it on their own home turf outside of our observation, usually.
And I'm John Ippolito in New Media at University of Maine. I'm really lucky to work with these two folks from computer science. So we are going to have a short and sweet presentation followed by a discussion, hopefully. It's the results of a study, one of the first that I'm aware of, certainly at this scale, of actual student responses to using AI in the classroom, not just for writing, but for a whole panoply of different genres and mediums. So without further ado, let's get started. Greg, did you want to mention something about use of the chat?
Yes. So feel free. This is an open space for all of us to think and discuss things. So as we go through the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done. If it reminds you of something you've done, if it brings a thought to your mind, if you want to critique something, if you want to celebrate something, feel free to just write whatever you're thinking into the chat. And you can also have discussions and conversations with each other. And we just want to make that space open to everyone. And then we designed the talk to be about 15 minutes of discussion at the end. Mostly through the chat, since we can't really like make breakout rooms, etc. I think. So yeah, so just welcoming all of your views and perspectives, and we're really excited to learn from you as well.
Okay, and we do have a couple people using Q&A, which is fine. If the chat gets overwhelmed, you can add a formal question there. All right, I'm going to get started by sharing my screen, and you should all see the intro slide that says presenter names and that sort of thing. So the title is, how big is the AI advantage for student creators? So the recording has started. I believe I saw it and I see a little recording message. So I think we're good with that. And the sponsor is this particular organization, Future of AI. So we're going to talk about a class room that was a test bed last fall. And we'll return to the slide at the end if any of you want to kind of follow up. This is part of a sort of larger initiative called Learn with AI, which at present is most known for being this website where you can go and search by sort of by field and by subject matter or by assignment and so forth, and find all kinds of resources, including past events, recordings, speaker bureau, all kinds of different things. There's over 300 different crowdsourced projects there now. New Media, this took place at the New Media Department at the University of Maine, where I'm a faculty member. This is a place where students do both technical and artistic projects, often combining the two in various forms of creative expression. So digital storytelling, web and mobile apps, and user experience design are very popular modes for that. So we had this human versus AI smackdown. We took an entire semester of the introductory new media class. Yes, a lot of first years, but also students who weren't new media majors, who were upper level classes, students who just wanted to take the class for general education credit and so forth. 50 undergrads, a bespoke interface to GPT-4. 4.0 is what we used. Thanks to, shout out to Troy for building that for us. And then we used some extra tools that were mostly free online services for media generation, things like 3D modeling and audio and so forth that weren't covered by GPT-4 at the time. We did coach students. The class, for the first half of the class, there were about 8 tasks that they did without AI, where they're just using traditional, if we wanted to use that term, digital tools. Second half of the class, the same 8 tasks, but with AI. And when they got to AI, we didn't just throw them into the pool and hope that they swam. We actually coached them on prompting techniques. And all 3 of us contributed to that sort of conversation and tried to give them best practices for getting the best possible results. The tasks included writing an essay, illustrating a story, writing a storyboard, grading an assignment. So those were sort of mostly sort of, storytelling / writing assignments, but also creating a manipulated photo, coding an avatar. So programming was involved, sculpting a 3D object, and recording a soundscape. So the whole sort of spread from text to image to other forms of media and code. When we got to let's see. Yeah, writing essays, let's say. That's the one that most people are most familiar with. Students were asked to write about a disruptive technology and then use this version of GPT-4 to ask it to help write about AI as a disruptive technology. So first they did it on their own with traditional sources like Google and writing in Word. And the second one was where they leaned on GPT-4 to write those essays for them. They were overall impressed. This is now relying on student surveys as well as interviews, periodic interviews that Troy and Greg did with students. They were impressed with the essay structure. They found them very well structured, clear divisions between paragraphs, topic sentences, and a coherent argument. They liked the examples. There were, examples in every paragraph, at least in the body, and they liked that the prose was very grammatical and, spelled right, and in that sense, much more fluid than most of the students would write on their own. They were disappointed about a couple of things, though. It wasn't all, sun and roses. There were unreliable citations, no surprises there. And if you've used these tools, know that that can happen. And they found the style of writing overly elaborate or formal, which is something that I think if you've played with these tools long enough, can be something that is hard to avoid, even with good prompting. So, one student that I, in memorable quote, said, "The AI seems like a student trying really hard to sound smart," which I thought was an excellent summary of the way these tools come across. So that was the result in writing. And there's been a lot of studies of writing in AI classrooms, but I don't think there's been as many studies about other features. So for example, 3D modeling. In the context of 3D models, you can see on the left the sort of pumpkins. It was like Halloween, so we had them use SculptGP, which is it's a tool online that you can use for free to kind of manipulate a sphere and create different sculptural objects as 3D models. And then on the right, it's literally just a prompt, in this case using the Luma Discord. So students were impressed at the speed of generating the 3D models, but there was a huge variety of results, and they had a lot less control over what the results look like. I would also say that, I picked a particularly good one over here. The duckies, kind of buoys look nice, or decoys, I should say. But there wasn't the sort of range or really creative inspiration that we saw in the human-generated ones. So that was something just in the context of 3D. When it came to the illustrated storyboards, they were also tended to be less less control. Students had less control over the outcome when they used AI. But again, efficiency and speed were much better. When it came to manipulated photos, I'll spend a little time on this because this, I think, is easier for most people to grok. If you've never tried making a 3D model or, one of these other sort of more advanced audio-visual tools, you probably tried Photoshop, or you've at least seen a photograph that was Photoshopped. So this case, we fell back on an assignment originally pioneered by Juliana Castro called Illustrate a Hoax. So, and the idea in the background here is the ethical concern about disinformation and the ease of creating deepfakes with AI. Well, of course, disinformation has been around in photographic realm since Stalin, and that back then it was airbrushed. Then Photoshop came along, and there were concerns about Photoshop, and now AI is the fastest, latest technology for that. The thread is not that it's necessarily better than a good Photoshop job, so much that anyone can do it. You don't have to be an expert, designer or photographic editor in order to churn out these deepfakes. So what we did is we had the students learn enough Photoshop to do that on their own, and then create AI-generated versions in the second half of the course. What was interesting here is that students struggled to produce realistic images. And by realistic, I don't mean detailed or, that looked nicely textured or lit, but just they didn't seem like they were from the real world. They didn't conjure up the kind of the vibe that evidence has, right? So if you look at the human-generated Loch Ness Monster over here, it's kind of grainy. It looks like, the kind of thing that might have been caught on a, in a camera in an early morning, whereas the AI-generated one is sort of frontal. It's very detailed. It seems extremely unlikely that someone would have taken that picture. And there's other telltale things you can see about, if you look carefully about the way the ripples are moving through the lake. But I think you see that same pattern throughout. The sort of channel shark, this claim that sharks made their way up into channels in certain cities. in the canals. I think this is a much more convincing picture than the shark kind of jumping, in the middle of the canal. And I must say that, the students generated multiple versions of these, and these are the best we could do in terms of trying to create something realistic that seemed to be potentially fooling someone into thinking, yes, there were sharks in the canals. Same with the jackalope, this mythical sort of, creature. This just seems, again, extremely unlikely that you would see this sort of half rabbit, half antelope, chasing you Jurassic Park style in the car while you're taking a photograph. So again, the results were hyper realistic, but hyper realistic in a bad way. That is, they did not convey the idea that this is something that could be believable. That said, there were some pretty compelling images. I'm going to cherry pick the best ones, I think, here. This is, Venice freezing over. This is Hitler on the moon, where, of course, he has a base. Bizarrely, the moon is in the background and also in the foreground, and also perhaps in this strange sort of dome over here on the left. That's a very common problem with these AI image generators, is they'll repeat the sort of the thing described in the prompt multiple times in the photograph. I'm not also sure how he's breathing. I like this one very much. It's a drop bear, this sort of myth about a cryptid that will jump on you in the Australian outback, sort of a weaponized koala. JFK as a Masonic figurehead. That's a Masonic emblem in the background. And of course, UFOs. So those that was sort of like the experience of students with trying with regular, digital Photoshop, and the sort of and not the AI features that are currently in the latest version of Photoshop, but just the sort of straight Photoshop and the AI image generators, in that case, mostly Stable Diffusion. Writing a storyboard. Okay, here's where you get to generate characters, related images. Students, we prompted them to say, can you deviate from the cliche? Because again, for those of you who understand the way that these large language models work, they are averaging the kind of keywords in the prompt to try to come up with something that meets the criteria, and that almost always means something that is inherently in the middle of other things, and that often makes it a mainstream result, and in the case of very dense data can even be something that's very cliche. So when you try to write stories with fictional stories or storyboards, you often get the most trite of possible outcomes. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl in the end. So we prompted them to try to find ways to break the cliche. That was actually the assignment. But it took them a while. It was a really hard thing for them to do with the learning language model, large language model. And I think that was actually a lesson for them, that cliches tend to be the center of gravity of these things. Coding, all right? We tried to make it very visual by asking them to use P5.js, which is a popular JavaScript library for writing code and games and designs online, to generate avatars for a game, sort of an animal that would represent them in something like Animal Jam or Pop Tropica or one of these online games. So they had to draw the avatar with P5 code, and we had to coach them through learning the code to do that. Then in the second half of the course, they simply asked ChatGPT to generate the code for them, plugged it in the browser, and see what the results are. The top section are the ones that were voted the best, monkey, ogre, butterfly. I actually really like the butterfly. I think it's sort of like reduces a butterfly to its essence. And I also really like the fish, which feels very evocative, even though I can't identify it as a particular kind of fish. But the fails, these are the ones that are voted the worst of 45 attempts. The horse is pretty macabre. The fish is pretty bad. The panda is something that will haunt me in my dreams. So these are clear, kind of failures of an attempt to create spatialized images with code. Most of them, though, felt that it was possible to draw a sort of convincing, recognizable, a very simplistic animal. It took quite a few iterations, at least a half dozen, and it required a lot less handholding than when we were trying to teach them the code. So the results were kind of crappy, but they got to those results faster. Soundscapes. So we also asked them to create audio, and we used custom tools for this that you can find online. And the idea was, how can we create soundscapes that are, represent a certain environment that you'll recognize. Well, when we asked it to create meadows or streets, they came off as super clumsy, stereotypes. You might hear a horn, but there's very little else to tell you that you were in a city street. The actual recordings, we asked students to go out with mics and actually record, or their phone, from actual settings of the ambiance of that, region or neighborhood. And that was much more subtle. The textures were much more interesting. So to sort of solve this problem, I think it was actually maybe Greg or Troy suggested this, to sort of layer multiple AI generated tracks on top of each other. So there might be like crickets, but there was also, maybe birds, but also the sound of a plane overhead or whatever. And you could generate each of those individually with AI and then layer them for a better effect. And let me see if I can play this one from one of our students. Will it open? Yeah, so this is an attempt. I don't know if you can hear that. This is an attempt to imitate the drop bear sort of sound.
No, we can't do that. Just post the link in for the chat and people can open it.
All right, that sounds good. So it's a good example, I think, of this working. Okay, so we asked them also to talk about audio, because here was a chance to, many of them are music aficionados, and they're familiar, many of them, with the controversies over AI music being scraped on works by musicians, as well as sort of potentially replacing actual musicians. And we asked them questions like, who should get paid? And the first priority across, for almost all students, was the original artist. They felt that somehow there should be some way, they didn't have the mechanism, but they felt some way that the actual original creators should be rewarded. Then we said, should record labels be able to sell AI versions of the artist's voices? Like, oh, I've got, Drake or whatever now in the AI version, and I'll sell these sort of ersatz Drake recordings as opposed to paying the artists themselves. They were a little more mixed about that, but mostly negative. The ones against, definitely not, and the 5 would be totally yes. Someone seems to think, yes, that would be a good idea. Corridor Crew is an animation. It's a sort of well-known example of someone creating rotoscoping type animation using AI. And so the idea was that might put animators or anime out of business. Does it democratize animation or plagiarize human artists? They were more on the fence about that. Okay, so they seemed to think there was potential there, and we're excited by that, at least, the kind of median of them, whereas some still saw the danger and others thought, no, this is really great. I can make animation now without having to go through all the trouble. Then there was an example we showed of William Yu, an artist, creating a deep fake in which an actor like Tom Cruise or someone who's well known for appearing in a movie would actually be recast through AI as an Asian actor, or potentially Black, Latino, and so forth. And so we asked, is this sort of like some horrible perversion, or is it actually a way that personalizing content could make it more inclusive, so that depending on your ethnicity, you might see a different actor in that same role using AI? And I was surprised to see how enthusiastic they were about that. They did seem to feel, according to this graph, that could make Hollywood more inclusive. I was also surprised at the result. Some of you may have know Holly Herndon, who Matt Dryhurst has done a bunch of experiments on AI and music. She's created a clone of herself that allows you to use her voice. This is before 11 Labs. This is a decades old project of hers. And I asked, which of these would be acceptable uses? Everyone said that, 86% said it would be okay to have her sing this AI clone of Holly's voice called Holly Plus to sing vocals of a song you wrote. Vocals for a song by another musician, most people said that was not okay. Personalized inspirational message in her voice, about half people said that was acceptable. And what was really surprising to me is 20%, which is a decent size, said it would be okay to write a personalized love letter to themselves from Holly, which I found rather surprising. So AI girlfriends, here we come. So I hope that gives you a sense of the sort of, I'll mention one more thing. The probably most provocative assignment we gave them was to have AI grade something that was either a paper that an assignment they'd been given in this class or in an outside class. So they actually were asked to go pick an assignment and the human grade from another class and apply it with a rubric to ChatGPT and see what the results were. The results were that they both had an encouraging tone. They had comparable levels of sort of accurate and constructive criticism. They felt that the AI grader who not just giving them a numerical grade, but also, giving them feedback was constructive. They did think that human TAs gave more specific recommendations, which is maybe not surprising. GPT-4 was harsher, which was kind of surprising to me. We speculate that might be because it didn't quite grok the level of the class. And then some people found feedback from the human with emotions more inspiring. So that's the results in terms of grading. Overall, though, we were interested in what happens to students' kind of mental health and their sort of sense of their self as a result of this study. And I'm going to let Troy and Greg take it from here.
Troy, do you want to do this one or should I do it?
You go ahead, Greg.
Okay, yeah. So in general, I think the most interesting kind of result is it's just a very mixed experiences from people in the class, even with the same instruction. We tried to design good instruction. We talked about ethics. We talked about critical use. We gave instruction on how to use these tools. So if you just try, a fairly ineffective prompt engineering strategy and get terrible output and then think it's terrible, we avoided these kind of things. And even with all this stuff, we just got lots of mixed results. Some people were confident in using it. Other people were less so, even after using it many, many times, doing reasonably well, I would say, in their outputs. And ethics was just a really huge variation. Some people were very confident in ethical use, sometimes because they're like, I don't think it's ethical to use this at all. It's plagiarizing people's work, other things like this. So in general, it's just like a lot of multidimensionality to people's reactions and experiences and variation. It's just was really mixed, and that was surprising. Troy, how about you go to the next one?
Yep. Okay. So some of the challenges that we were running into or we considering is like transferring skills from like this class where they're learning how to use AI to other classes. Not only because like the honor code, a lot of the students felt like they're really only using this because they have to, but a lot of course policy is very it's a minefield. They want to make sure that they're not plagiarizing, and so the best course of action is often seen as to not touch it at all. And then like the generative AI like affecting student career visions and identity. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes this is negative. Some students felt like AI gave them the ability to automate like menial tasks that they felt was standing in the way of their what they actually enjoyed. Whereas some students felt like that AI was intruding on their creative passion. And they didn't want to use it at all unless it was something they didn't care about at all. Could you go to the next slide there, John? Yeah. So some of the themes that we kind of want to like ask everybody, like generative AI happens in this context of student institutional, like what's this ethical, philosophical, and identity implications with like using generative AI? Second.
So
Yeah, I think that's good,
sorry.
Troy. So our last slide has just some discussion questions, and
Okay.
love to hear people's responses to it. So if you
we
have
don't have we don't have too much time. We should just move to that last one.
So we could take maybe 2 to 3 minutes, choose a question that you think would be interesting and think about maybe your response to it. I'm particularly curious about question number 2, which is just the variation, kind of like students' reactions to these tools and what people are seeing when you're including it or not including it in your classrooms. And then, yeah, we'd just like to have some discussion about these questions. So thanks very much for listening to us.
Shall we maybe go to stop the screen sharing and let people talk if they're interested, or post stuff to the chat?
Yeah, let's just leave the slide up and then people can chat and ask questions, etc.
Okay.
So you can either use the Q&A, or I think if you ping us, we can ask you to unmute and you can ask your question.
So someone, Abe, has some comment about reducing student learning. We need to learn and train students to identify the mental process they are trying to get AI to enable.
Yeah, and I agree with that. A lot of students feel like they're cautious to use it because they feel like they're not learning if they're using AI. And there's definitely a way that they could approach AI where it's complementing their learning rather than using it as a well, to bypass the learning process and come up with an answer.
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment, Abe. I think if the students don't know what skill or process they're learning, it's really hard for them to know what's a good use of AI in that skill, or are they learning the parts that they really need to know? And so I think in some ways when you're using AI, I think it'll lead us to actually teach better, because we'll kind of like have to describe in like a lot more detail the steps and different parts of using a skill if we want some parts of that to have AI assist in it.
I'm curious how many other people have heard concerns about students worrying that their major will be replaced by AI. It's definitely something that we heard among our students, especially like the designers. And I've heard from other people who are both teaching programming as well as teaching, kind of audio-visual skills, that there's a lot of anxiety students feeling about those occupations, especially for something like, computer science, which was supposed to be bulletproof when it came to getting a job. I think the chat has been hijacked by koala discussions. Colin says, I was just thinking about that, John. I have students that plan on majoring in something like art or graphic design that say, why should I focus on that when a computer will generate something fast compared to me? And Anya, I'm guessing that's how you pronounce your name, teaches an academic in fine arts in Germany. Different feelings, excitement, great visionary possibilities, but also concerns about security of their own artworks. And if it's not clear, the ethics of AI was something that we addressed in every single class, and certainly the questions about exploitation, plagiarism, and eventual, kind of poisoning the data by seeding so much slop into the internet that the models get trained on themselves and become very inbred. Those are all concerns that I think are valid in any kind of creative generation, but they tend to show up first with the artworks. Cassandra says, yes, I've heard from my students of many majors, including teacher candidates, worried about the future for K-12 teachers. So do they think they're going to be replaced by Conmigo and these sort of like AI tutors? That's a really interesting and scary thought. Jane asks, have employers and business associates asked about your work regarding AI and student creators? And Greg points out that we haven't quite published it yet. Greg and Troy are doing a lot of careful analytics to make sure that we get it right and we kind of squeeze whatever insights we can out of the data.
Yeah, I think it's very varied also. So we're a little concerned about trying to make overgeneral type things. Yeah.
We also have had a roundtable discussion with alumni of our program who are already out in the world, working in software, working in arts, working in business startups, and they described the impact of AI in a very very direct way. They've already integrated it into their working processes. They don't so much expect students to have AI graduating, so much as they want students who are curious, who have are not necessarily, maybe they're cautious and understand some of the ethical problems, but they don't let that get in the way of their ability to explore and be open to some of these tools. So it's not like they expect a checklist of like, yes, I can do this with ChatGPT and this with Midjourney and so forth, Copilot. It's more, they're looking for a kind of mindset, I would say, at least among the alumni we surveyed. Abe says, I'm concerned that AI will be used as an excuse to devalue high quality work. A select group of people will valuing individual creativity while the broad culture gets served normalized slop. I would agree with you, Abe, but I'd also say that in some creative genres, we're already being served slop, and that's well before AI. Things like auto-tune and algorithmic, kind of the Spotify algorithm are some of the more obvious examples of that. I'm only teaching high school, but encounter many instances of students short-circuiting learning to just provide responses. Greg has a question back about that.
I think we're hitting the time limit, but I mean, we'll stay here as long as people want to chat. I'd say one of the big takeaways I'm kind of hearing here, and also for us from the work, has been like, there's just a lot of variation in student reactions, and often people are making some pretty big meaning decisions and interpretations when they see AI, ranging from like AI is not going to be anything, it's just bogus, like because it's hard to use, to, you know, why am I in college? What am I going to do with my life? Am I ever going to have any jobs? You know, all these different, it's very big, it's very meaning laden. And I think we need to think not just about teaching AI as a skill use, but we need to really figure out how to support students in making meaning around that and navigating around it. Especially often we have more secure job positions sometimes than students. And so we might feel it a little less immediately.
Anya's mentioning that in German universities, AI labs are being founded. I have a particular concern about the sort of silos in which some AI is being developed. I was really glad in this testbed to work with folks from computer science, and me coming from more of an arts background, because I felt like that gave us a lot bigger lens to view these developments with, both in their impact on the workplace, as well as the kind of range of genres and mediums, and ethical dimensions.
Cool. I think let's give some like quick previews of some of the more interesting results for the people who decide to stay a little bit.
Oh, they get a special goodie.
Yeah. One very interesting thing is I mean, people that study education will not be surprised by this, but a lot of times, like when students came in with some views about AI or its capabilities, you know, it's like their views kind of shifted as they used it, but a lot of times they were like quite sticky. They'd kind of like find a way to shift back to the view that they had before. This was often in the context of kind of saying like, oh, AI's capabilities are kind of are you know, overhyped, which is often true. They often are overhyped, but in terms of like making the career implications for that, you know, it's kind of like they kind of wrote it off compared to some other people that, you know, if they think of AI as just a tool, might be in their toolbox. I'd say they'd have more kind of even-handed, like, well, we'll keep getting better, but I don't know how fast it will be, and, you know, kind of views that I would say are a bit more in the middle road of accuracy. So that was a really interesting to see that happen a lot with a lot of different people.
I'm also really curious to see what happens with this kind of study in, you know, 4 years, when the people who started using ChatGPT in middle school end up in college.
Yeah, if anyone knows of any other studies that are kind of similar to this in other settings or similar ones, we'd love to hear about it. I mean, we follow the literature, et cetera, but things don't always get published that quickly, particularly qualitative work like the ones that we're doing. But yeah, and then any last questions or thoughts? We'd love to hear from people.
I just want to say, from my perspective, I was surprised at how ingrained students' study habits are, even you know, by the time they're in college, that they've gotten used to a certain way of working. It may not be a good way of working. It may be using, you know, Google to get to Wikipedia, or Chegg to cheat, or, you know, paying someone in Kenya to write their essay for them. But they have that kind of model, and asking them to break out of that can be anxiety inducing for them.
Yeah, or very legitimately, some people, and I would say there are differences in different groups, tending to be like, well, what I'm doing already is okay. And so, sure, I'll just kind of stick with that, versus other people that are more like kind of a tinkering mindset towards it. All these ways of using technology are totally valid ways, but the patterns in them among different groups could lead to disparities and other things like that. So we're looking at that as well. And I would say we definitely see a little bit of that.
All right, I think that's kind of we're going to lull in the chat here, so maybe this is a good point to let you guys go and participate in the rest of the conference. It's been fun to share results with you and hear that other people are feeling similar, you know, kind of consequences or reactions from students in their own domains.
Yes. Thank you much, everyone.
Yep. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.